No mai, haere mai. Welcome to the SPADA Q&A session with the legend that is Andrew Shaw. And he is officially a legend now, having won that terribly exciting award at the TV Awards last night. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you very much, Irene. Nice to see you.
So we're going to start at the very beginning. I'm actually old enough to remember watching you as a teenage television host, but a lot of people listening to this won't be. That was an incredibly life-changing gig for you. How did you get it? What happened?
Well, absolutely life-changing. I had the briefest of exposures to television before I joined it. My father had been television critic, and so I had accompanied him occasionally to see things, even a couple of things at the Shortland Street studios. But at the time I had no plans, no real job. Nothing was going that well. And my father recognized that the ability to speak seemed to be the one thing that I had too much of. And so it was he that wrote a letter of application after seeing a job description in the New Zealand Herald and the Auckland Star for a television host to work in the children's program time slots on the new channel, the fledgling channel to be launched, which was then, what became TV2. So he wrote the letter. I signed it. That bit I could do. And that led to me turning up at the Shortland Street studios, the top of Shortland Street, to be confronted by alarmingly talented young people, practicing their dance and playing the cello. And I thought, what am I doing here? But clearly there was something that, that they saw that thought, they could make something out of this rough diamond.
And they did, and it went well. And as well as doing the regular shows that you did, you were very much one of the memorable stars of the old telethon broadcasts, well, certainly one of the memorable local stars. Do you have a favourite telethon memory, a favourite memory from those times?
I don't know. I've said to people that for me, it was extraordinarily fortuitous that the birth of the new channel where I started was the birth of the telethon concept in New Zealand. And the first one was quite small, but huge in terms of, what it did in terms of raising money and awareness for St. John's Ambulance at the time. As they got bigger, they just became more and more fun. Simply to be on something as a presenter live for 24 hours at a time where the entire nation is focused on their screen is a pretty substantial drug. And so there were simply countless memories of working with extraordinary people from all around the world, doing madcap things on screen, just being part of such an extraordinary gathering. There's no one memory that I can say this is the moment that defines telethon for me. And, I went from being on it to producing it with an extraordinary team of people. And, there are very proud moments for me when I think of the vast amounts of money that were raised and the wonderful performances that people gave and the generosity of New Zealanders who, pushed a hospital bed from Auckland to Hamilton to raise money. You tell people that these days, they go, what was wrong with this country was fantastic. It still is fantastic, but the fact that you could be part of something that brought all those people together, regardless of their background, their attitude, their beliefs, to believe in one thing at one time, that's a pretty special thing to be part of.
And you met some amazing people. I think you've said before that one of your favourite people you met was Mccall, the great screen star.
Over the course of the telethons, there were, I think for Miss Mccall, it was like, what the hell is this? Here was a screen goddess, who found herself amongst, people who painted their stomachs to whistle famous tunes, gang members who brought in a bathtub full of cash. God knows where that came from. But there were people from all over the world that came in, and some found the telethon, once they realized what it was, you could see over the course of 24 hours, they just grew into it. People from Coronation Street and from American soaps and stuff, Some looked at it and went, get me out of this. I have no idea what this madness is. To be fair, Ms. Mccall, I think, thought, what the hell has my agent landed me in? But she was very gracious and very elegant, and has one of the best voices for a woman actor I've ever heard.
So as you sort of touched on there, somewhere along the line, you made the decision to move from presenting to directing and producing. Why did you make that decision, and how did you make it happen?
Well, I hadn't been in the business that long when I started to realize that presenting, was a lot of fun, a lot of opportunities, a great deal of entertainment. But I used to watch the iconic directors of the time in the entertainment world, Michael Hockley and Graham Hodgson and a few of the others, and go, these guys have got it. They've got control of it all. And so I thought, I want to do that. So, but because I was on it, I had this very fortunate opportunity to stress to the company that in order for me to keep doing those things for them, I really wanted to learn how to do this. So I had this rather fortunate transformation, being a presenter first and a director, very much a trainee, and then slowly becoming the director first and the presenter when required afterwards. So, but it was because, it was the making of the shows. It was the atmosphere that really attracted me. And although presenting was something I really loved, and I mean, as you probably saw last night, I was still quite happy to get up and talk the hind leg off a donkey in front of people. I really loved what multi-camera directing felt like, for you to create the reality at the very moment that it existed.
Would you advise young people in the industry working as presenters, or actually just generally working in any job, to do that thing of getting as involved in production and learning as much about the other areas as they can?
I think you're better in any role if you understand all the other contributing roles that go into it. If you're a specialist and a passionate person about sound and sound design, you can only be better at it when you understand lighting and lighting design and set design, right? Because of those things all impact on the work that you do. As a presenter, it was really important to me, and I think it still applies, to understand all the contributing factors to the end result, to understand why the lighting takes as long as it does and what's happening with the sound implications, and why there are very specific instructions about what you should do and when you should do it and how you should act and move. Those things, I think, are extremely helpful if you're in front of a camera. All knowledge is power.
Through the 80s and 90s, and actually even beyond that, you produced and directed all kinds of entertainment shows and things. But as you have touched on, you had particular expertise as a multi-camera director, and I think you always enjoyed doing that. What makes a good multi-camera director?
It's a little bit like standing at the back of a room full of people having a party and being able to see them all at the same time, and being able to tell your story of that party by picking the most salient images at the time that tell that story, but see the whole thing. One of the greatest multi-camera directors New Zealand ever produced was a fellow from Wellington called Malcolm Kemp, who produced and directed some of the biggest multi-camera events. And he was the example that, I wanted to follow. He was the man I thought was the very best. And he had that innate skill. Put 16, 20 lenses up in front of him, and he can see them all. And then, what makes you very good is being able to make that snap decision, which captures the moment. In a world now which is dominated, not unsensibly, by highly post-produced shows, it's a skill that's often lost apart from news and live news and sport. But it's a wonderful thing to do. And when you sit in the truck, when you're doing a live show, award show, or you're doing some big performance, that moment, and it comes shooting back to the telethon, when I've sat in the truck and the network, they call you and say, it's 5 seconds to you. And whether or not it's the next 2.5 hours or 3 hours or 24 hours, it's up to you. There's no reality unless you find it. And that's a pretty captivating experience.
For a New Zealand music fan like myself, you have an intriguing little claim to fame, a couple of them, which is that you've actually directed 2 music videos that have kind of ended up becoming quite iconic. One being The Clean, Anything Could Happen, and one being Dee Dee Smash's Outlook for Thursday. You wouldn't have known at the time that they were going to become the classics that they have. Do you have any memories of either of those shoots?
You're
allowed to say no. I have no memory.
Of course I do. Both are tremendous, songs by great artists. Anything Can Happen, I thought was a great song. The first moment I heard it. My dim recall is we agreed with the band that we were going to treat it quite literally, and that there was a deliberately random image selection, if you like, featuring the band, including a spare tire, which I threw towards the band. I don't know why it happened like that, but it just felt like a thing to do at the time. But, I've said about both that 80% of the success of those music videos is the song that they reflect. Tremendous songs, both of them. Outlook for Thursday is a wonderful, wonderful song in its genre. And Dave Dobbin is a wonderful human being to work with. The whole band were. So, it was just one of those fortunate collaborations where great music, great artists, wonderful people, open-minded, and there are aspects of both I would like to have done a better job on. But, back then, you had news film and 3 days to news film, 3 days and no budget. So you'd better come up with something quick, lad.
And you don't get to do it again. So that was that. As the 90s wore on, you moved from producing and directing into the first of your sort of more TV executive kind of roles. Yeah. How much strategy was involved in those career moves? Did you feel the need to move on from directing and producing, or did things just start getting offered to you?
I've never had a strategy at all. I didn't have a strategy to get into TV, but I did. And I didn't, I had a desire to become a good multi-camera director, but I was greedy. I also wanted to be a very good presenter. So it was an additive to me. It wasn't, I must stop this and I must start that. No, at the time that I joined the administrative side of commissioning, I just finished doing a series called Clash of the Codes, which was at its time the sort of first of the sports reality shows, which I produced with Paul McDonald and Tony Manson, and couldn't have done it without them both. And at the time, I was, Tom Finlayson, who was running commissioning, asked me if I was interested in it, and I thought, well, yeah, it's like I'll learn more, and I kept producing. So again, I dragged some of what I was currently doing, and likewise, I'd only been doing that a year or so when the then head of programming said, "How do you feel about programming TV2?" And I thought, well, that's a very interesting idea. I love that channel. It's my channel. I was born on that channel. So it was really, and in an odd sort of numerical synchronicity, I started programming TV2 20 years after it went to air. Yeah. But I've always been fortunate that, and I think I said this yesterday, that all along this journey, people have been generous in teaching me and sharing their ideas and opening up to me and forgiving me when I've made mistakes and picking me up and dusting me off and sending me forward, which is the most important thing we can do for one another, is to forget the first big mistake, focus on the learning. And so it's just been on that way ever since, really.
Most of your management jobs have been at TVNZ, but in the early 2000s, you took off to South Pacific Pictures for a while. Yeah. And during that time, interestingly, you were very heavily involved in New Zealand Idol, getting the American Idol format and becoming New Zealand Idol. Tell us a bit about, was it hard securing the format and getting it to work for a New Zealand audience?
Are you familiar with the phrase "dog catches car"? I knew, from my time at TVNZ that, well, two things. I went to SPP, at the request of John Barnett, very generously, to be their chief operating officer. And I wanted the company to grow out of just being a drama specialist. And I thought I could see the emergence of these big entertainment formats. And I thought, that's the one. There's, we're going to have one, we need to have Idol. And so I hunted it down through Fremantle, and they didn't have any representation in New Zealand. So it was a deal we put together and then presented it to TVNZ, who were very supportive of it. And so New Zealand Idol was born. I remember the day after getting it and securing the commission from TVNZ, and then watching an episode on air thinking, oh, Christ, we've got to make this. And it has to be as good, scalable, but as good. And so it was a very nerve-wracking journey, but it helped redefine South Pacific Pictures to a degree, from being not just seen as a very successful but drama specialist company to something else. And I was very proud of the series. I thought that the people involved in the production, did an extraordinary job of executing it for us.
You're one of the few people I know who've done programming, commissioning and program acquisition work. Do you have a preferred role out of those three?
No, I tell you, they all come. It's like multi-flavored ice cream. Each is a different flavor, but it's all ice cream. Programming is a very difficult job these days. I'm not going to sit here and claim to be a very astute programmer. I was reasonable at it, but I was surrounded by much cleverer people who probably enhanced my performance, but I've worked with some extremely skillful programmers. I recognize that. And these days, working with linear and non-linear scheduling and curation is an entirely different skill set to the days when you only had to compete for eyeballs across 3 or even less channels. Now it's the world of curated content that you're competing with, right? International acquisitions, for me, was a surprise. I got into it when I took over programming both channels. So that when I was running both 1 and 2, you had to be the programmer and the buyer. And I just loved it. I loved the people you met. I obviously loved the places that you went. It's not hard to be in love with an industry that requires you to negotiate in New York and Paris and Rome and Monte Carlo, Nice, does it? And in London. But I really liked the people. And there were some really big things we had to do when I first started doing that in the middle to late 90s to fix the cost of international content for TVNZ and for us. So it was the first big battle was to cease trading in American dollars, because that was so hurtful to us in terms of a fluctuation, to try and get increased rights and greater flexibility with the utility that we had with shows. And that went on, from when I started buying in 95 and finished buying in June of this year. So I loved the negotiation side of it. I loved the battle.
Is that the main, what are the main skills for program acquisition work? Is it that negotiating skill?
It's many things. Relationships are critical. Relationships between companies, relationships between individuals, an understanding of what the other party requires, what a good deal looks like, when enough is enough, understanding the ever-changing nature of rights and what you need to make a business work for a deal, being aware of the changing strategies of your partner companies. Universal, NBC Universal just used to be a studio you bought shows from. Now with Peacock, they're going to be an OTT service, and they're going to want that to be ubiquitous around the world. So windowing is changing. What's also changing is how important local content is compared to international on platforms. That's changed significantly. The streaming services, we do owe reluctantly a debt of gratitude to them, in the sense that they challenge the industry to make more interesting kinds of scripted content, particularly in the first instance. But also they meant that there were other options for producers in terms of studios. And now, with Disney and, HBO and Time Warner all growing into these mega corporations who want to sell their content directly to the consumer, there's also less of it around to buy. And what was very pleasing, in the last week or so, when you read the plans that TVNZ has, for example, for 2021, look at all that local content. Even though that all of us have been through a difficult financial period, it's really rewarding, gratifying to see the commitment to New Zealand content, which can be successful abroad as well as here. There is an appetite for it. And we just have to work really carefully together as an industry to seek those opportunities to bring more money into New Zealand to help finance our creative aspirations.
You're well known for your cheeky sense of humour, Andrew.
Not true at all.
And it has got you in trouble a couple of times, but I would argue that a sense of humour is a great wheel greaser when it comes to working in production and the work you've done in program acquisitions, because humour and charm are a part of it. Do you think that's true? Do you think that's kind of stood you in good stead?
We like to work with people we like to work with. It's very hard to work effectively with people that you can't relate to. So relationships between people in this business are critical. In acquisitions, if you haven't got a strong relationship with the people that you're debating with to get a deal done, you haven't really got much of a chance. The mistakes I've made in the past have been when I have misunderstood the difference between representing a company and being a funny guy. And if someone was to take anything out of this conversation, as a learning, it would be, there's a difference and recognize it. And there's a time and a place to be being funny first with a message. But if it's, if you get it wrong, you live with the consequences. And so I have certainly learned from those experiences. But you're right. I mean, you've got to, if you can't work comfortably, and if there isn't room for amusement and humor and a bit of good banter, it would be a dull world, wouldn't it?
It certainly would. Yeah, I think a sense of humor is pretty essential to our line of work.
Well,
we've sort of slightly touched on this a little bit already, in terms of getting New Zealand productions to the world and co-production, so on and so forth. What types of production do you think New Zealand is particularly good at?
A little while ago, someone asked me, how do we come up with a definition like the Scandies have Scandinois, in French film, like, and when I look at some of the shows that recently have made an impact here and abroad, One Lane Bridge and Luminaries and the Golf Sounds, Brokenwood, they all had our color and our sound and our voices. The place we lived and lived was very much a character. So we conveniently produce in English, which is a big market, right? Secondly, we have extraordinary location, which adds character to the things that we produce. And that should not be underestimated as powerful. When I talk to people in other countries about why they should produce here, I always ask myself, what problem of theirs am I solving? Right? They're not particularly interested in reflecting our culture and identity or multiculturalism and identities. They'll be thinking, how can I sell this to my audience in England or America or Canada? And so if we're going to think about what we produce for the world, we've got to, first of all, make sure that headline, producing for the world, is on the top of the whiteboard, right? Because if we're going to make international television, that's what it has to be. And that doesn't mean it has to be at the cost of language or culture or diversity. It just means that we've got to think, and I said this to a producer the other day, imagine someone who lives in London and we're pitching a show to them, and it's hard to get a producer, in Liverpool to get a show. How much harder is it to get a show made in Wellington or Christchurch? So you've got to make sure that what you offer them is an audience solution for their business. So that may have been a story that could take place anywhere, but happens to take place in the Marlborough Sounds or the Hawke's Bay, and could have international cast in it because the characters could be cast from the UK or from further abroad. They don't have to be cast here, but that as a business, it provides opportunities for craft and crew and on-screen talent in this marketplace. And the happy balance is some money from here, some money from there, some from cast from there, some crew from here, and finding, coming back to your thing about acquisitions and negotiations, a balance, you know. And most of the people I talk to overseas are open to this. New Zealand's recognized as a beautiful and special place. Most of them want to come and live here, unfortunately, but we can't be letting them in. But they recognize the depth of the talent here and the beauty of the landscape and the reputation that New Zealand productions so far have already had internationally. So we have an opportunity, and we've just got to think how to work strongly together, even though the outcome is often for an individual benefit.
I told my SPADA colleagues I'd keep this fairly close to 30 minutes, and we're approaching that, but I've got a couple more questions, so we'll just go a little bit over maybe. What is your best advice for someone starting out in television? And don't say, don't do it.
No. Honestly, you know, I mean, there's a lot of young people that have worked in the spheres that I've been in, you know, right up until most recently when I left my full-time gig at TVNZ. You know, the passion that burns in your heart that drove you to take the first job you've got, regardless of how small that might be or how entry level it feels, is just the first step. Around every corner in this business is another corner, and under every rock there might be a pearl, you know, a story, a book, an idea. The journey itself is endless, and the opportunities are also endless. You just have to believe in yourself, be active, be positive, seek out the people you want to work with, and ask yourself, if not today, why not tomorrow?
Lovely. And I know that you have had some great friends and mentors in the industry. The legendary late broadcaster Peter Sinclair, I know, was very special to you. What has been the role of mentors in your life? And is that something that you would advise people to try and make sure they have people in that kind of mentor role?
I think we have to be very careful about the term, because I don't think you can go out and professionally get mentors. You know, like, I don't think that's a relationship. I was lucky, you know, when I arrived in the TV business, I was surrounded by people like Marcia Russell, who was a tremendous feminist journalist at the time. You know, I met people who were great artists, who had extraordinary literature skills. You know, I found myself working with people who were 10 or 15 or 20 years my senior, who were very generous in going, listen, scumbag, ratbag, kid, enfant terrible, I think they used to call me, you know, but they became friends and mentors because I kept asking the questions. So with regard to mentorship, it's built on goodwill. It's built on a genuine interest and an asking, you know, learning. I want to know, Irene, teach me, tell me, how do I do this? You know, that's how you end up in a long-term relationship with people who are seniors in terms of experience and years, but it's got to be a genuine inquiry and friendship-based relationship. I don't think two strangers can decide, you know, I'm 50, you're 30, I'll be your mentor. It's a bit like, you know, sponsoring your rugby team. It doesn't seem real. So I've had tremendous guides, and they've all been wonderfully talented people, some, yes, who are no longer with us. But I think, you know, I'm trying not to flatter myself. It was because I wanted to ask and I wanted to learn and I wanted to know, how do you do this?
Yeah. So you've left TVNZ, but you have by no means retired. You're doing assorted production consultancies. That's what you'll continue with now? You're not going to do a late run return to the presenting?
You know, look, I have a great face for radio now. I'm still doing quite a bit of work for TVNZ, you know, assisting with Shorten Street and the international drama financing side of stuff. and offering advice when it's asked. And I'm working with a couple of people outside of that. I want to work, if I'm going to work, with people who are passionate about what they want to do and who honestly think that I've got something I can contribute. That's what I want to do. And I have no plans other than, getting on a motorbike with my good friend Richard Driver tomorrow morning and riding to Bluff.
Riding off into the sunset. And Richard presented your award last night, and it was a genuinely lovely thing. You got a standing ovation, which I think was very deserved, and it was lovely. And we are coming to the end of our little masterclass broadcast here. Is there any last thing you would like to say before we say goodbye to our listeners, watchers, viewers?
Well, I said it mostly last night, but, first of all, thanks for an extraordinary 45 and a half years. I hope it's not over. I've got a low heart rate and no recognizable pulse, so I expect to be around for a lot longer. But let's just focus on the future, and let's get through COVID, and let's rebuild and redesign and reinvigorate this industry together. And I wish everybody in it the best of good fortune.
Thank you very much, sir. That is our session done. Thank you, people who tuned in to watch. Ka kite anu. We are out of here.